The deep rumble of Michael Jordan's motorcycle broke the silence of the empty parking lot. He turned off the engine, but before even stepping off, something made him pause. An elderly man moving slowly with a tired expression, struggling to push a row of shopping carts that seemed bigger than him. Michael watched for a moment and then made a decision. What happened next would not only transform that man's life, but deeply touch yours as well. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're rewatching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The soft morning light filtered through the worn curtains of Thomas's small home. He rose slowly, feeling the weight of yet another day pressing on his shoulders. His back protested with every movement, but he ignored the pain, as he did every morning. He needed to stay strong for his wife, Alice, who still slept peacefully in the room next door. The kitchen, though modest, exuded a warm and comforting atmosphere. The walls were adorned with old photos, a smiling wedding portrait, a beach trip from years ago, and a family gathering at Christmas. Thomas paused for a moment in front of the pictures. What happened to those times, he thought, tightening the wedding band on his finger. After preparing a simple cup of coffee, Thomas headed to Alice's room. She was sitting on the bed, staring blankly into the distance. Alzheimer's had taken so much from her, but Thomas could still see glimpses of the woman he loved in her eyes. He knelt beside her, gently holding her hand. "Good morning, my love," he said tenderly. Alice didn't reply, but a faint smile appeared on her face. For Thomas, that was enough. He helped her up, guiding her to the bathroom and then to the kitchen table. While she settled in, he began sorting through her medications. Each pill was a reminder of the battles they faced every day. "Today is going to be a good day, sweetheart," he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. In the living room, reality awaited him. On the table, a stack of bills had piled up, most marked with overdue notices. Thomas sighed deeply, picking one up and scanning the numbers with tired eyes. "Maybe I can pick up a few more hours at the market this time," he murmured, searching for a shred of optimism. Before leaving, Thomas returned to Alice's room to say goodbye. She was holding their wedding photo, something she did almost every day. Thomas gently stroked her gray hair and said, "I'll be back soon." "Stay well, my love." Alice didn't respond, but in her eyes, he saw a small spark of recognition. As he closed the door, Thomas cast one last glance at the sky, now brightening with the sunrise. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of a day that had yet to unfold. With a weary expression, he whispered softly, "Give me strength for one more day." Little did he know, this day would bring something that would change his life forever. The market's parking lot was already bustling when Thomas arrived. He stepped out of his car, an old sedan, showing its age as much as he was, his knees protesting as he climbed down. Grabbing his faded work vest from the back seat, he put it on with the same quiet dignity he always carried. "Another day?" he muttered to himself as he made his way to where the shopping carts were scattered haphazardly. The cool morning air was a blessing, but he knew it wouldn't last. Soon, the summer sun would heat the asphalt, making the task even more grueling. Thomas began his work methodically, organizing the carts into long rows. He pushed carefully, his eyes sharp to ensure none of them got loose. The repetitive motion sent a throbbing ache through his knee, but he didn't stop. Every minute he lost meant more pressure, and he didn't want to give the manager any reason to complain. Taking a brief pause to wipe the sweat from his forehead, Thomas glanced around. The parking lot was packed with cars and hurried shoppers, rushing in and out of the store. A young man pushed a cart past him in a hurry, almost bumping into Thomas. "Sorry, sir," the man said over his shoulder, disappearing into the aisles. "Sir," Thomas repeated softly with a bitter smile. He knew his age was showing, but hearing it always reminded him of how quickly time was catching up. As Thomas aligned a new row of carts, a loud voice called out from behind him, "Thomas, what's going on here? Why are these carts still scattered all over?" It was the manager, a man in his 30s with a perpetually impatient tone. Thomas straightened up, ignoring the pain in his knee, and replied calmly, "I'm getting everything in order, sir. Just need a few more minutes." "A few more minutes, that is no excuse," the manager barked with a sarcastic edge. "If you were faster, we wouldn't need two people doing your job." Thomas pressed his lips together, holding back any response that might make things worse. He knew arguing would only escalate the situation. Instead, he returned to the carts, pushing them with more force than usual. The metallic clatter of the wheels echoed through the parking lot. Minutes later, as he aligned the final row, one of the carts slipped loose and nearly hit a parked car. "Thomas, With his slower reflexes, managed to catch it just in time, but the effort sent a sharp pain shooting through his knee. He leaned against the cart for a moment, catching his breath. "Just one more day, Thomas," he murmured to himself, closing his eyes. "Just one more day." For a brief moment, he looked up at the sky and whispered a quiet prayer. He didn't ask for miracles or drastic changes, just the strength to keep going. "Help me, God, just get me through this day," he said softly, in a tone of quiet resignation. As Thomas struggled to align the carts once more, he didn't notice that someone was watching him from across the parking lot. A man on a motorcycle had parked and removed his helmet, his eyes fixed on the scene, observing Thomas' movements and the interaction with the manager. The man adjusted his sunglasses and crossed his arms, as if deep in thought about what he had just witnessed. Thomas, unaware of the observer, returned to his work, oblivious to the fact that this stranger would soon become a pivotal figure in his story. As he lined up the carts, feeling the weight of the day pressing on his back, he had no idea that someone was watching from afar, someone who was about to change his life in ways he could never imagine. The low hum of a motorcycle echoed through the market's parking lot. It was a classic model with a robust engine, yet the sound wasn't aggressive, almost as if it announced its arrival discreetly. The man on the bike, clad in a black jacket and sunglasses, parked in a quiet corner away from the main commotion. Michael Jordan dismounted calmly, removing his helmet and shaking his hair loose. He scanned the parking lot, his eyes taking in every detail. He wasn't there to buy groceries, that much was clear. Something had drawn him to the scene. That is when he saw Thomas, hunched over a row of shopping carts, struggling to align them. Michael noticed the visible strain in Thomas's movements, the way he paused every few seconds, clutching his knee as if in pain. He also noticed the manager, now casually chatting with another employee, completely oblivious to Thomas's struggle. Michael frowned. Something inside him urged him to act. Without making a sound, Michael walked toward Thomas. When he was close enough, he spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Need a hand with that?" Startled, Thomas looked up to see the man standing before him, someone who looked vaguely familiar but out of place in this setting. He seemed kind, but Thomas couldn't immediately place the face. No, don't worry about it, sir. I've got it under control," Thomas said with a tired smile. Michael took a step closer, his gaze shifting to the messy row of carts. "I insist," he replied with a small smile. Before Thomas could protest, Michael was already helping him push the row into place. "Look, I appreciate it, but this is my job," Thomas said, trying to take back control. Michael paused for a moment and looked at Thomas. "Sometimes even the strongest need a helping hand. Don't to worry. I just want to lend mine." Thomas hesitated, but something in Michael's tone reassured him. He sighed and said, "Well, if you really want to help, start with those over there," pointing to another scattered row of carts. Michael nodded as if accepting a mission and got to work. As they worked together, Michael struck up a conversation. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity. "Been a few years," Thomas replied. "Ever since my wife got sick. I needed a job to keep up with the bills. It's not easy, but it's what I've got." Michael listened intently as they worked. He didn't interrupt, but his empathetic gaze spoke volumes. Thomas, perhaps feeling comforted by Michael's calm presence, opened up further. He spoke about his wife, Alice, the good times they'd shared, and how Alzheimer's had turned their lives upside down. Michael asked questions, never intrusive, as if he wanted to truly understand the weight Thomas carried. After aligning a significant number of carts, Michael suggested a break. "Let us grab something to drink, my treat." Thomas hesitated, but gave in to his thirst and fatigue. They walked together to a small cafe inside the market, where Michael bought 2 coffees. They sat on a bench outside, watching the bustling parking lot. "Have you ever thought about retiring?" Michael asked casually. Thomas chuckled bitterly. "Retire with what money? I sold almost everything I had to pay for Alice's treatment. What's left barely covers the bills." Michael looked down at the coffee cup in his hands, silent for a moment. "You've done so much for her, that's admirable." Thomas shrugged. "That is what any husband would do. When you love someone, no matter what happens, you keep fighting." That sentence lingered in Michael's mind. He knew Thomas wasn't looking for pity or recognition. It was simply the raw truth of a man living for the love of his life. Michael finished his coffee and looked at Thomas, clearly moved. He couldn't explain it, but he felt there was something he needed to do for this man. It was as if fate had brought Thomas into his life for a reason. "You're a strong man, Thomas, stronger than most people I know." Thomas smiled faintly. I don't know if it is strength. Might just be stubbornness. Michael chuckled softly, but his eyes remained serious. He had made up his mind, though he didn't reveal it yet. What Thomas shared about his life made Michael stop and rethink everything he thought he knew about sacrifice and resilience. As he watched Thomas return to work, Michael knew he had to do something big. He just wasn't as sure how Thomas would react. After finishing their coffee, Michael followed Thomas back to the parking lot. There was something in Michael's tone that made it clear he wanted to keep the conversation going. As they pushed another row of carts, Michael asked casually, "So, you mentioned your wife. How's she doing now?" Thomas took a deep breath before answering. "Alice, she's stronger than me. But Alzheimer's doesn't give you much room to breathe. Some days are good, and others not so much. Today was neutral, I guess." Michael paused before asking, "And the treatment? You said you sold a lot of things. How are you managing to keep up with it?" Thomas stopped for a moment, leaning on one of the carts. He gazed at the horizon as if drawing strength to answer. "I sold the house we built together. It was our home, full of memories, but I needed to pay for her initial therapy sessions and medications. Then went the furniture, the car, nearly everything. I only kept what was essential for her." Michael stayed silent, absorbing every word. Thomas continued, feeling like he finally had someone willing to listen. "The job here at the market doesn't pay much, but it's enough to get by. The problem is her medication. It's expensive, and I can just stop buying it." "And you," Michael asked, his voice low but filled with a concern. "How are you taking care of yourself?" Thomas gave a tired smile. "There's not much time or money for that, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that she has what she needs." Michael nodded. He placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. The gesture was brief but deeply meaningful. "Thomas, you are an admirable man. Even if you don't believe it now, the world needs people like you. You deserve a little relief." Thomas didn't know how to respond. There was something in Michael's sincerity that disarmed him, yet brought a strange sense of comfort. "I've already made my choice," Thomas said, trying to close the conversation. "Alice is my priority. She always will be." Michael nodded, respecting Thomas's determination. But something in his gaze suggested he was already forming a plan. As the day went on, Michael stayed in the parking lot, helping Thomas with the carts and observing how he approached each small task. He saw how Thomas ignored his physical pain, how he endured the manager's sarcasm without losing his composure, and how, despite everything, he carried himself with quiet dignity. When Thomas's shift finally ended, Michael shook his hand firmly. "I hope we meet again, Thomas." Thomas smiled faintly. "If you keep coming around here, I'm sure we will." Michael chuckled. "You can count on that." As Thomas walked away, carrying the weight of the day, Michael stayed in the parking lot for a few more minutes. He knew he couldn't change Thomas's past, but something inside him screamed that he could do something about this man, his future, and his wife's. As Michael climbed back onto his motorcycle and adjusted his helmet, he cast one last glance toward Thomas, who was disappearing into the horizon. "He deserves more than this," Michael murmured to himself. In that moment, he decided he would do something Thomas would never forget. Michael spent the night thinking about Thomas and his story. As he sat at home reflecting on everything he had learned, he realized how small actions could create an immeasurable impact. He knew he couldn't change everything in Thomas's life, but he could at least ease part of his burden. With that decision, he started taking action. The next morning, Michael returned to the store, this time with a concrete plan. He walked into the manager's office and requested a private conversation. "How can I help you?" the manager asked, eyeing Michael with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. He recognized the man who spent the previous day in the parking lot. Michael, calm and composed, replied, "Yes, you can. I am here to talk about Thomas, the gentleman who pushes the carts." The manager raised an eyebrow. "Thomas? What about him? He works hard every day, even while carrying burdens most of us can imagine. I want to ensure he gets the support he deserves." The manager looked confused. "You want to help him, why?" Michael pulled out a check and placed it on the desk. "I want to pay Thomas's salary for the next few months. On top of that, I want him to have some days off to rest, and I need your cooperation to make sure this happens without making him feel uncomfortable. He can to know the money is coming from me. Just tell him it is a special bonus from the market or something." "Can I count on you?" After a few moments of hesitation, the manager nodded. "I think we can make this work." While still at the store, Michael went to the customer service desk and asked for a list of nearby pharmacies. He wanted to ensure that Alice's treatment costs were covered too. A quick call to the pharmacy where Thomas picked up her medications confirmed the details, and Michael arranged payment for the next several months. Before leaving, Michael stopped by a nearby cafe and picked up 2 drinks. Returning to the parking lot, he found Thomas organizing the last row of carts before his break. "Coffee?" Michael offered, handing him one of the cups. Thomas accepted it with a tired smile. "You're a good man." You know that Michael laughed. "I just like coffee." Sitting again on the same bench where they had talked the day before, Michael looked at Thomas with admiration. "You're an inspiring man, Thomas. Truly." Thomas shook his head. "I just do what needs to be done." "That is exactly what makes you special," Michael said. "Most people would have given up. You didn't." At the end of Thomas's shift, the manager called him into the office. Thomas entered hesitantly, surprised to be summoned. The manager handed him an envelope. "What's this?" Thomas asked suspiciously. "It's a special bonus," the manager replied, avoiding direct eye contact. "You deserve it." Thomas opened the envelope slowly. Inside was an amount large enough to cover his expenses for the next few months. His eyes filled with tears as he held the paper with trembling hands. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Just enjoy it," the manager said, trying to hide a small smile. When Thomas returned home that night, he held the envelope like a treasure. As he entered, he saw Alice sitting with their wedding photo in her hands, as she often did. He knelt beside her, took her hand, and said, his voice breaking, "My love, we have a chance. Everything is going to be okay now." Alice looked at him, and for a brief moment, a genuine smile crossed her face. Thomas felt as though he had received the greatest gift of all. As Thomas silently gave thanks for the miracle he had received, Michael, sitting on his motorcycle in the distance, watched the small house. He revved the engine softly, disappearing down the road. His heart felt lighter, but he knew this wasn't just a good deed. It was the start of something bigger. The next morning, Thomas woke up early, as he always did, but this time something felt different. He felt a lightness, a sense of relief he hadn't experienced in years. He walked to the living room table and opened the envelope he'd received the day before, staring at its contents as if trying to confirm it was real. Inside the envelope, alongside the money, was a simple note. The handwriting was neat and elegant. "Take care of her. You are not alone." Thomas read the message over and over. He didn't know who had sent this gift, but the words touched him deeply. For the first time in years, he felt that someone truly cared. After preparing the breakfast, Thomas went to Alice, who was sitting in her favorite chair, holding their wedding photo. He knelt beside her and held her hands. "Alice," he said softly, "we have good news. Someone, an angel, maybe has helped us. At least for now, our financial troubles are over. You will keep getting the best care." He expected the usual silence, or at best, the empty smile that had become her norm, warm but distant. To his surprise, Alice raised her eyes to meet his. There was something different about her gaze, a clarity he hadn't seen in years. "Thomas," she said, her voice soft but full of emotion. Thomas froze, his heart racing. "Alice, she smiled, the same smile he remembered from the early years of their marriage. "I feel like I am waking up from a long, confusing dream." "You are here. It's you." Thomas felt tears streaming down his face. Before he could respond, he cupped Alice's face in his hands, as if trying to confirm this moment was real. "Yes, it's me. I am here. I've always been here." Alice looked around the room, as if rediscovering every corner of their home. "Our house, it's different. But it's still ours, isn't it?" Thomas nodded, unable to contain his emotions. "Yes, my love, it's still ours." She reached out, touching the wedding photo in her lap. "I remember this, our day. It was so beautiful." "It was the happiest day of my life," Thomas replied. She looked at him with a sparkle in her eyes. "Today can be another day like that. Thomas, dance with me." Thomas was speechless, but quickly stood and extended his hand to her. Alice, though moving slowly, took his hand and rose to her feet. He led her to the center of the room and began softly humming the song that had played at their wedding. Alice smiled as he guided her. Their steps were simple, but filled with meaning. For a few minutes, and the world around them disappeared, and they were back in that ballroom, dancing as if no time had passed. "I missed you," Alice whispered. "I never stopped being here, my love." Thomas replied, holding her carefully, afraid that this moment might slip away. The day felt magical. Alice maintained her lucidity, talking with Thomas about old memories, laughing, and even helping in the kitchen, just like she used to. They shared stories, recalled happy moments, and Thomas felt like he'd received the greatest gift of all. By evening, as Alice rested in her chair, she looked at Thomas and said, "Thank you for never giving up on me. I love you." Thomas held her hand and replied, "I love you, Alice. Always." Meanwhile, Michael was on his motorcycle, already heading to another destination. But his thoughts lingered on Thomas and Alice. He knew his actions had made a difference, but he also recognized that the true impact came from the love and resilience Thomas demonstrated every day. He stopped on a deserted road, removed his helmet, and gazed at the horizon. A slight smile appeared on his face as he thought, sometimes the smallest gestures have the biggest impacts. Michael knew he didn't need Thomas's recognition. True kindness, he believed, doesn't seek anything in return. In the days that followed, Alice's clarity began to fade again, like a flame slowly dimming. But for Thomas, that day remained etched in his heart as a treasure, a miracle he would never forget. Whenever challenges arose, he remembered dancing with Alice, seeing her smile as she had in the past. Thomas continued his routine now with renewed strength and hope. He knew that even in the darkest moments, love and kindness could overcome any hardship. As the sun set on the horizon, Thomas sat on the porch next to Alice, holding her hand. He looked at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are. You saved more than our lives. You gave us hope." On the road far away, Michael Jordan sped up his motorcycle, the wind rushing past his face. He didn't need to look back to know he'd done the right thing. Sometimes it's us in the silence that the greatest acts of kindness leave their deepest marks. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.